kind of crazy. That bro-mance did not last very long, did it? And right now, in the middle of billionaires fighting with one another on a national stage, I think this is a great time to talk about healing crisis. And you've heard me talk a couple times in the last couple of videos about my own personal healing crisis, and I really haven't spoken much about what that actually is. I think this is a great time to talk about it, both on a personal level basis, and then what we are experiencing as a national collective, because I believe something pretty important and special is going on with personal healing crises, but we're also doing this as a collective here in the United States, and it's important to take a look at what those dynamics are, because that way you don't get lost in the shuffle of the whole thing and lose hope and lose faith. Like, there's a rhyme to the reason here. There is a rhythm to all of this. So let me get to that. So first, let's set the baseline and just talk about what is a healing crisis. Well, to me, there may be other people with other definitions, but to me, my lived experience of a healing crisis means that you go along and you go along and you go along in certain emotional states or certain mental states or certain physical states. You go along with your own certain rhythm and ways things that work. And then you end up running against a wall, kind of, where your psyche or your emotion or your body kind of gives way because it can't do that any longer. To me, it feels like kind of running into an invisible wall that you didn't know that was there. And in 2020 hindsight, you kind of go, oh yeah, I couldn't do it like that anymore. And so you run into this invisible wall and things begin to come apart, like your biorhythms come apart, or your health comes apart, or your emotion comes apart, or your mental state comes apart. It basically, there's a coming apart. It dismantles. And so that's what we call in the spiritual community a breakdown. It's a breakdown. Now then, once things break down, that's the place people get stuck. They're like, oh my God, it all came apart. I'm a failure. Things are terrible, or it's all wrong. A lot of times people get stuck there and get really terrified. And the thing I want you to know, if you are there or if you've had that happen, yeah, it's kind of a terrifying place, because all of a sudden, the rug has gotten pulled out from underneath you. Things aren't working like they used to anymore. The new thing hasn't arrived yet. Everything's up in the air. You're not sure what's going on. So in that place of the breakdown, it's the butterfly phase of the imaginal cells. This is the phase that is very similar to what a butterfly experiences as the imaginal cell phase. Okay, so the butterfly has been a caterpillar eating, and then it curls up, anchors in, and creates its chrysalis. And then in the chrysalis, it turns into soup. That's the imaginal cell place. And all of those cells, what scientists have found, biologists have found, is those imaginal cells turn into cells of huge potential, like amazing blossoming potential. And eventually that soup begins to take form as the butterfly. And I know this is overused and cliche and all of that, but that's what it feels like when you're going through a healing crisis. It all comes apart, it all kind of goes to mush, you turn into a soup, and it's in that place, that's your imaginal cell place of the phase. And then as you're in that place, you go through your transformation. You go through your healing transformation. So the healing crisis turns into the healing transformation. What became a breakdown turns into a transformation, and then it eventually turns out as a breakthrough. What usually gets the headlines is the breakdown. The breakdown, and oh, things are terrible, and oh, it's not working out, and the sky is falling, and those are the tapes that we run in our heads personally or professionally. We see the headlines, that's what gets the headline. What doesn't get the headline is the transformation, because the transformation then becomes the breakthrough. So to me, that's what a healing crisis is. And I've done so many of these. I've done so many of these for myself, and I've midwifed my clients through so many of these. This is a natural part of the transformational spiritual process, the transformational human process, the transformational human ascension process. This is what we are doing and have been doing on steroids, just kind of like really, I mean, the healing crisis really got amped up, headed into 2020. Like when we did COVID, that was a major healing crisis. Look at how everything fell apart. We all had to deal with it personally and then also collectively. And then we went through our imaginal cell transformational phase. Literally everybody cocooned in. We had to shelter in place. We were cocooning. We were doing that as a collective. And then there were beginning to be solutions and ways to work with it. We were gradually able to come out of that through the other side. And we came through that place through a greater collective transformation. So a couple things I would like to speak to now that I have created like a bit of a foundation, and like those of you who have experienced healing crisis and are listening to me and are watching this going, oh, Dana missed a spot here, or here's another aspect, or here's my experience I want to share. That would be great, because I know that there are a lot of new awakeners who may be experiencing things like this and are really disoriented by this kind of stuff. So this video is kind of like a PSA, like a public service announcement of like, burr, burr, alert, alert, this is a healing crisis, this is what it looks like, here are all the pieces and parts, this is what you can expect. We all kind of sort of need to know what that is, because I believe we are in a whole other wave of a different kind of healing crisis. So before I get to talk about the current national healing crisis that we're in, that is so apparent, just so clear what we're doing right now, I want to talk a little bit first about the personal level, because there are some things I see going on as somebody who's been on path for 25 years and worked in the business for nearly 20. I see some changes going on that are of concern that we all need to be aware of and we all need to be talking about, because there's a certain amount of warning and risk that is beginning to go with these healing crises. Up until about 2020, when you hit a healing crisis on the planet, the way the energies were sitting and the potentials are sitting, it was still pretty solid ground to walk through your own healing crisis and be safe and feel like you kind of had an idea of like you knew what you were doing. And especially if you experienced a couple of them, you kind of could begin to like count on like, oh, this is the part of the healing crisis I'm in, and kind of count on a rhythm, and also count on like the amplitude. The amplitude on the healing crises up to 2020 were still pretty reasonable. It was still a pretty reasonable deal. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was timeline jumping or the intensity, or like we're getting more into the ascension cycle. Post 2020, healing crises have gotten more intense and faster, and more are happening, and the amplitude is getting turned up on them. And other than my healing crisis of losing my son and me nearly dying, yes, that was a healing crisis. That was a healing crisis. Other than that one, I've never had a healing crisis really threaten my life until I got to COVID. COVID healing crises, no, that was life and death stuff. And so that was really the first time as a collective I began to see like, oh, this is getting a lot more real. This is getting a lot more tense. And then we came out of that wave and things kind of calmed down until the fall of 2022. And I would say the fall of 2022, it's kind of been amping up again. Still at that point, I wasn't really feeling a cause for concern. But I would say now, like coming into this spring, I have either known people or heard of people who escalated into their own healing crisis in a really rapid way and ended up landing in the hospital. And this most recent healing crisis that I went through, I was like several hours away from having to drive myself to the ER. Like, that's how close I got. Like, I got dangerously close to the sepsis line, and you don't mess with that line. All of a sudden I was like, something new, and, something in me was like, boop, boop, like, Dana, this is not a normal, regular healing crisis. Like, you got to pay closer attention. You need to do more than you've done in the past. And all of a sudden, my like warning bells went off at a whole other level, and I began remembering these other people who had landed in the hospital, both people I knew and also ones I'd heard about. And all of a sudden, through this most recent healing crisis that I've gone through, coming apart, landing in imaginal cells, beginning to come out, like I'm beginning to come out the other side. Like I'm not out of the woods, but I'm coming through the other side. I'm seeing what my transformation is. It's incredible. Partway through this healing crisis, something in me went, both for myself and then noticing these other people, like picking up on what these other people are going through. And all of a sudden I was like, boop, 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 boop. Folks, we are now in landscape. We are now in landscape where your healing crisis, which normally in the past has been about spiritual growth, emotional growth, maybe some physical fallout. In the past, it's been in a safe zone, okay? Now we are hitting healing crises that are ramping up. They're more intense. They are more amplified. And because of that, it is pushing our physical systems in a way that we're not able to keep up with it, and it can land us in the hospital. It can literally create a physical crisis event. And so I am putting this video out as an alert, as a warning, definitely for the spiritual community as a whole, the whole of the spiritual community that knows about healing crisis and knows how to handle it. This is me saying, hey folks, I am seeing things happen at a whole other level of intensity, of amplitude, of rapidity. And if we're not careful in taking care of ourselves, we could land in a very serious physical situation if we're not keeping tabs on things. So this is me saying to you that if you see yourself going into a healing crisis, do not take lightly the support of your physical body. Like, when my red alert system turned on, I was like, oh my God. And then that's when I went into overdrive. And like, not that I wasn't taking care of myself before, I was, but all of a sudden I was alert on a whole other level. And I think that's what made the difference. That's what made the difference. And so this is me saying to you, pay attention, like your situational awareness of where you're at in process with your own spiritual growth and development, emotional healing growth and development, and how your body is handling that. That is really important to pay attention to from here on out, okay? Because I think we're dealing with a whole other animal. Until this ascension thing platforms or stabilizes, we could have a tendency to cycle into healing crises so much more easily than we have in the past. And if you are ignoring your physical symptoms, you could land yourself in a certain amount of physical danger. So this is me just saying, please be careful. Please take care. Please pay attention. I want to make a nod to that. Now, there is another aspect of this. And this is what I want to direct to all of the new awakeners, the new 4AMers, and then the veterans who are working with the new awakeners and new 4AMers. So I know there are a lot of you out there and you are just chomping at the bit to learn and grow and get the information and move as fast as you can and what, and learn, and take it in. And you're doing your thing, and that's fantastic. And I want you to keep doing that. I want you to keep going after it. But this time I will say caveat, but given what we now know about how healing crises can spin out of control and potentially put us in the hospital, I think it's important for all of you to pace yourself. Please pace yourselves, all right? And I'm not saying stop. That's not what this is. What I am saying is your body can only handle so much. And so you're doing your spiritual growth and development, and then you're paying attention to what can my body sustain? What am I able to sustain? And I know, and I know part of the driving force. Here's the back end of the message I want to give to you. Here's part of the driving force. I think when you first come on as awakened, and I felt this, like when I first had my psychic awakening and I was coming on and talking with Linda, like I was gobbling up every single inch of the line that Spirit Team was giving me. I was like, and I put myself into a few healing crises that way. I definitely did. But there was something in me. I was like, I felt like I'd come to the table late to the game and I had all this to learn and la, 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 la. And some part of me was like, the spirit train's gonna leave without me if I don't get this fast enough. And I think that happens to us, even the best of us. And if there are those of you who are new, who are awakening and new, and 4 a.m. and awakening new and coming online, and there's some part of you going, I'm late to the game, and I gotta catch up, and I gotta do as much as I can, as fast as I can, because my spiritual train is gonna leave without me. And what I want you to know is that is literally a physical impossibility. And here's how I want you to break it down. I want you to stop and think about that. The whole thing about your spiritual growth and development requires you to be on the train. Like the spiritual physics of you being in your spiritual path and you being in your spiritual journey means you are already on your spiritual train. Okay? And your spiritual train cannot leave your spiritual depot without you on it. It is a physical impossibility. So if you are feeding yourself mental tapes of, I gotta catch up because I might miss the spiritual train, that's a con. Like, if anybody else is saying it or you're saying it to yourself, that's a con. That is not true. And what you need to tell yourself is, me just being awake and me just doing my thing means I am in my spiritual journey. I am on my spiritual train. I am doing it at my own pace. And my spiritual train cannot leave my spiritual depot without me on it. Like, that train is going to sit in the depot and percolate until get on the steps and here we go. And then, just as kind of a cherry on the top of the sundae, let's talk about the bro-mance that is blowing up right now on the national scene. Like, I watched that all go down yesterday, right? And it just kind of escalated and tit for tat between Muskrat and DT. It was like, and I was watching the whole thing and I'm like, man, if that is just not the epitome of like the healing crisis this whole nation is going through, I don't know what is. I know that there are all these ins and outs of the political landscape and what we're all dealing with this right now. But do you know what I think it boils down to? Where the seminal aspect of this, where it really boils down to a couple of elements that are so critical in all of this. What I believe this whole thing, this national healing crisis that we're going through, it boils down to one thing, and that is empathy. All right? Because there is a whole movement of us right now going, we care. We care about ourselves. We care about one another. I see myself. I see you. We see the interconnectedness. And what do you have to have for that? You got to have the connection of vulnerable empathy, right? And there's a whole wave of us doing that right now, more than any time else. And then there's a whole other group of people who are kicking and screaming going, empathy, that's weak. That's for sissies. Only money, only power. That's the only thing that speaks. And these are people who are like, la, 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 la. Don't say empathy in my space. And then to see these two grown men babies, like neat, with their billions and their power and everything tit for tatting across the wires in front of all of us. And you know what they were screaming about? They were screaming about empathy and their starvation and their lack of the connectedness of vulnerable empathy, right? I'll give you one more example and then I'm going to go. To me, the standout of this whole thing that happened on the national stage, it happened last summer at the Democrat National Convention, and all the speakers came through, and one night, Governor Walz got up and gave a speech. And what happened? His son, Gus, was bursting with so much love and so much pride, and he couldn't hold it in, and he stood up and he pointed at his dad, and he didn't have a mic on him, but you could see it on his face. He's like, "That's my dad." And the whole country came unglued. Remember that? There was a whole group of us in empathy, just melted, crying, just like, "Oh my God, this is crazy amazing." And there was a whole other group of people that was freaked out and started name calling and sissy and this and that. It was really toxic. It was really ugly. And so to me, even though this whole thing is wrapped up in politics and power and money and the haves and have-nots and everything, but you know the element I think this boils down to as far as the national healing crisis that we're in right now? It's the difference between the people who want to live in connected, embodied, acknowledged, intimate, vulnerable empathy with one another, and the people who are kicking and screaming, who do not want to come along for the ride because they are freaking terrified by that. To me, that's what this whole thing boils down to. And the thing I want you to know is, before I came on to do this video, like, you know how I am with my pendulum. I kind of want to know some statistics and numbers on some of the esoteric stuff. Like, I ran my pendulum on this, and I think this is why Spirit Team was so adamant about you guys got to get together as your collective. So I asked the pendulum to give me the numbers on how percentage-wise, on how large percentage-wise the empathy camp is and how large percentage-wise the non-empathy camp is. You want to know those numbers? Here are those numbers. The numbers are that the people who are freaked out and don't want to be in empathy, they're 28%. 28% of this country who is not willing to deal with the empathetic aspect of relationship. You want to know the group of people, the percentage of the people who are? 55%. That was the number Spirit Team was talking about. They're like, to get this thing rolling, to get it going, you guys got to get together as a collective over like the, 52, 55% mark. We're there, 55%, which leaves how many people are sitting on the fence? Those freaking fence sitters. If you're a fence sitter, you need to get off the freaking fence. There are 17% fence sitters who are not in either camp. They're kind of going, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. And I'm going to say to those people, you got to EQ vote. You got to EQ vote on this, because this is kind of the whole point that we're having right now. That's what I've got for you for now. Make sure you keep walking forward so you can dance and connect up with those miracles that are going to meet you along the way. And I will see you in the next video.